Jungle.
Hello, welcome to Is This AI, where we humans on the Beamer AI Council aim to bring you myth-busting insights, practical ideas, and a little more clarity for the AI road ahead. I'm Ollie Veysey, writer, filmmaker, and content strategist, and I'm here today as co-chair of the British Interactive Media Association's AI Council. Regular listeners will know we can't begin without our weekly game of Where is Lisa Talia Moretti dialing in from? So, Lisa Talia, where are you dialing in from?
I'm actually at Alto University, which is where the 10th annual My Data conference is being held. And I am both attending and I'm also speaking tomorrow on making the business case for responsible AI and particularly AI ethics. So hello from Helsinki.
Wow. Well, we will have to do an episode on the business case for responsible use of AI. That sounds like a very cool talk. Please come back and share that with us. And back with us this week, we have world-class designer and AI Council UX guru, Tom Good. Tom, this week I was enjoying reading some of your suggestions for improving the ChatGPT experience itself, including options to pause voice interactions and edit text, which all seem very sensible and smart ideas. OpenAI, if you're listening. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
No worries. Nice to be here again.
Our special guest is Luke Alexander, Chief Digital and AI Officer at 4 Agency Worldwide. Luke is dedicated to harnessing the power of generative AI responsibly, and we love to hear it. Hello, Luke. Thanks for coming.
Hello, Ollie and everyone. Thanks so much for having me along. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into this one. It's a nice, provocative topic.
Yes, looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it. So here it is. Last week, we discussed the systemic change AI is bringing. In fact, it was discussed as a new form of capitalism. This week, we are kicking off with the thought that AI is not ready. Not ready. Well, now you tell us. It might be a bit late for that, but what do we mean by not ready? Not ready for whom and in what way? Tom, tell us a bit about this.
Sure, absolutely. So this topic is all around AI adoption and particularly within an enterprise transformation space. As we all know and expect, there's been billions of dollars of investment. Every company's jumping on the AI bandwagon. But the question really is that converting to success and return on investment? Lots of studies are showing differing and questionable results. Some showing that actually a lot of organizations are not capitalizing on the investment they're making. Others showing that individuals, people themselves within organizations are really adopting AI as themselves, but maybe the organization isn't quite pushing that forward to achieve the results as a company.
Luke, do you want to pick up on any of those particular threads, or what's your take and what's your experience of this doing work on the ground with clients?
I see a whole spectrum, right, of different organizations at different levels of readiness. So it's interesting. I'm going to maybe predictably turn it on its head and say that enterprises aren't ready for AI rather than they are not being ready for enterprises. And I do think there's a big gap for sure between what's being promised and we are in a hype cycle. There is no doubt about that, right? It is one of the most overhyped technologies in the universe, but it is also one of the ones that has potentially the greatest genuine value. And I think there's just this massive gap. And I see a lot of insecurity, really, and quite rightly, where people feel like they're doing their best, feel like they're following the rules, they feel like they're going through the right processes, they're doing it right, but they're still not seeing the benefits. And so my initial thing here is, what do you measure? What are people actually measuring when they say, the enterprise, it's not having the impact that we believe in the workplace? Because there are some metrics. So Microsoft use this metric where they say, if we give it to you for 3 weeks, then take it away, what percentage of you would pay to keep it? And I think it's a really good metric because it shows a genuine value. And whenever they report it, they're reporting their own numbers, don't get me wrong, but it's always in the high 80s, and that tallies totally with my expectations. And you see it in about 40% of businesses have an active subscription to an LLM for their staff, but 90% of employees use AI. So there's a gap, right? People are using it and they find value in it, whether or not their enterprises think they do. So I do think there's an issue there. I think it is it's a people issue, but it's also a cultural issue.
I think it's a really valid point. And I think for a lot of organizations, when they are adopting new tech into the business, they take a very tech-centric approach to that strategy, right? Instead of a people-centric approach. So right now, people are really excited, right? We're talking about a hype cycle. People are really excited about AI. They think this is going to be the answer to all of their problems, and they're just focusing on trying to get AI into the business. But what we're seeing is that when AI gets into the business, research is saying to us that between 80 to 90% of AI projects are failing. And that goes up to about 95% when we look at generative AI specifically. And when you dig into the details and you get to see why it's actually failing, there's some brilliant research, right, that's come out from the RAND Corporation, actually of August last year, that shows us that 3 out of 5 of the reasons have to do with problems. So for instance, stakeholders are misunderstanding or miscommunicating what kind of problems need to be solved in the business with AI. The second is focusing way too much on the technology and not focusing enough on the problems that they need to solve for real users. So they're using AI to not solve user problems. And then the last one is this kind of expectation gap. And I think we've spoken a lot about this before on the pod. You know, AI being marketed to leaders as being magic, as being as a silver bullet. And when they bring it into the business, this is driving the third reason that AI is failing, because it's related to problems that are too complicated or too complex or way too difficult for AI to solve. So this again connects to that AI literacy piece, like constantly having to educate senior leaders about what AI is, the kind of intended use cases that and the kind of use cases that it really can be applied for. So when you bring AI into the business, you need to be applying it to not only well-defined problems, but to the kind of problems where you have also the infrastructure as well as the data that you need to succeed.
Not everyone is coming along at the same speed. Surprise, surprise. Anyone who's worked with big enterprises knows that complicated projects within global organizations require a huge amount of work with the people to foster that environment for something like this to succeed. The other things that have flashed up this week around, open AI openly admitting that hallucinations are mathematically inevitable, and so there's a trust question here. And what kind of margin? And again, Luke, maybe I'll offer this to you first. What kind of margin for hallucination can be accounted for and is acceptable? Humans are fallible after all. Do we expect AI to be infallible and perfect? And how can it operate in the enterprise environment if it's not perfect?
Yeah, no, I mean that's completely it, isn't it? We're used to technology projects having a clear input and output, a software product, you buy it and it does a thing. And if it's not doing the thing, it's either buggy and bad or you're using it wrong. And those things are kind of understandable. But I think it's such a different mindset. People suddenly go, okay, I'm good at using it. I know what I'm doing, but it's still not quite working out. Or it's doing something unexpected, because it's this very abstract concept that there is a sort of thing, we could debate for a million years what the verb we should use is, but a kind of thinking going on, right? A kind of black box, a kind of thing you might expect from interacting with a human, not interacting with a machine. And that's really difficult. I mean, we see, if you've got something you're meaning to sort of get off your list that takes 15 minutes every day to do, and you could use AI for it, but actually you're being told AI will solve it, but actually it does take 2 days, say, to really understand how to automate that process, to really try and get your head around what does good output look like? What kind of things are going to come out of here? What kind of risks are there? With hallucinations, a classic example, and the cleverest people I have seen in businesses of all sizes and shapes and types have been flummoxed by hallucinations, because they're so hard to spot unless you have domain knowledge. But you need to have that kind of support. So you've got this thing where you've got, the organization has to care about compliance, care about responsibility, care about doing it right. The individuals are not necessarily set up in a place where they know what is happening behind the scenes in a way that allows them to allow that. And then you just have this lack of glue. You need to support it. You need a really good corporate culture and some experts on hand to get people through to getting to the value. And it is hard. I think that's the thing I say most often to my clients. This is hard. It's not actually very easy. It is really complex. And it's changing every 5 minutes, which doesn't help.
I remember reading the other day around a lot of large companies buying into RAG models quite early on and spending significant budget trying to get something, their knowledge base, their data, their content available through this new technology. But now actually, as technologies progressed, all that money may not have a huge return on investment because the company is now leveraging maybe ChatGPT with a connector that connects to SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Drive. All these things are now becoming your ease of access almost into some of these systems. I imagine, with MCP and things like that, it will continue to evolve. So actually, when you go back and look at the ROI for these projects, maybe that's, I guess an investment cost or an innovation cost, but not always a direct pipeline to success and business value.
Like in theory, we've got this world where you can set an LM across your data and it's more capable than anything in the past to turn that unstructured data into structured data. The problem is actually that a lot of things that make really good data for the use cases within organizations, like emails, files on systems, they're just like poorly curated. If you take a business that's been running for 20, 30, 40 years, who knows what your Copilot instance, for example, will go and find. And there's loads of examples of organizations implementing something like Copilot and then someone saying, hold on, we've all had access to everyone's salary data for 6 years or whatever, that sort of thing, because it just makes all these previously invisible things visible. So there's a huge amount of prep you can do. The big issue is that there isn't any time, right? The scale of these projects means if you've not thought about it, got it ready, launched it, started piloting, testing within 3 months, you're probably now at a point where whatever you were planning on doing is being superseded. So it's really tricky to keep up with the requirements. And we do lots, you can sandbox things, you can play with synthetic data to check it works first. All of that kind of stuff is good, but at the end of the day, you have to put something live eventually.
Just to step back and where this came from, the MIT figure quoted that 95% of organizations are not seeing any return on their AI investment.
Controversial statistics, I think, on that one.
Why are they controversial then?
I think with the MIT study, I think there was some disputes I read around how accurate the data was, particularly in terms of measurement. But I think that sort of takes us back to the ROI point again. How are we measuring success of these programs? Is it just because, the CMO that they were interviewing in that study says, this is working really well for us? Is it because there's a real countable, return on the money you put in there? Is it efficiency gains? And I think more importantly, a lot of organizations starting these projects off with that endpoint in mind, with the, potential gains that they're going to achieve. I think that's a big challenge as well, because it's hard to equate everything across so many different types of businesses as well and say, this is equal value almost to what we're trying to achieve here.
And also fundamentally, if a client of mine started 20 projects, 20 pilots, all but one of them failed, that's not necessarily an issue. That's potentially just a really, really good set of people trying some things out. It didn't work. That one thing that did work makes them a huge return. So I think the idea that we're in this sort of really, really, really fast changing phase and expecting things to just, work 100% of the time whenever you pilot them is kind of a weird thing to expect, I think.
I think that's a really interesting point you raised. I think part of what the study was also looking at and discussing that I think unfortunately didn't make in the headlines because there was a sexy statistic, right, that got captured and then capitalized on. But part of that study was also saying to organizations, you have to treat AI not just as something that you're going to just drop into your workplace and suddenly make everything work really efficiently. That is not going to happen. The organizations who are actually succeeding, I guess, faster than everyone else, faster than their competition, are those that are really embracing the friction that AI kicks up. And they're embracing the friction by working with employees to understand what are the problems that you're trying to solve. What are the problems of your intended users? And really having a deep understanding of that kind of problem-centric approach. Also understanding what kind of tools work within existing workflows that employees are currently working within, and not trying to throw new tools at them and say, you have to use this now, and then not understanding that those tools don't actually integrate within the kind of enterprise technology stack that employees currently already being forced to work in and have become accustomed to work in. Because if that happens, then you have a complete unwillingness to take on new tools. So that can also cause major failure within a business. I think another thing that we don't talk enough about is leadership within these businesses. All of these senior execs are saying you must use AI, but they themselves are not actually even using these tools. And they themselves are not understanding some of the opportunities as well as the shortcomings of these tools, and are then not able to pass down their leadership advice, their new skills and expertise. And that again creates an organizational culture that isn't fit for purpose. Because if your manager isn't using these tools, but you're being told to use these tools, and these tools don't actually fit within your workflows, again, this can cause a real unwillingness amongst colleagues. And then, the last point, and I'd be remiss as somebody who talks so much about responsible AI, not to bring this up, but providing colleagues and co-workers with the necessary training, with the necessary guidance, with the necessary use case policies, with the necessary principles that can help guide and ensure that the values of your organization are continuing to manifest in the work that's being produced and in the outcomes that are being produced, so that employees can continue to hit what good looks like. So it's this piece around the friction that I'm super interested in. And those that are ignoring that friction and not working with that friction are not actually going to be able to get the return on investment that they're making.
That's absolutely spot on. And I think that comes across, I see a lot of people focusing on productivity, on sort of things that we do already that we can make more productive or whatever, automation, and missing the genuinely transformational stuff, take a step back. If we launched this company tomorrow, what would we be doing that we couldn't do yesterday, all that kind of stuff. And I think if you just focus on this sort of, let's use AI to make it a little bit faster, you're missing the fact that this quirky, unusual, abstract thinking tool that works completely different from anything else we've ever had in human history can do some things you weren't expecting that might be better side effects than you originally had. I think that's spot on. The only thing I'd add as well, talking about just what companies owe to their employees, which I think is really important. They do owe, guidance, but I think also clarity,
So
permission,
much.
try it, experiment it, be curious, there is very little risk in logging into any AI tool and trying it on non-client work with no confidential data, just trying out some stuff. What can it do? Well, there's very little risk in that, as long as you're super clear about when the guardrails need to kick in, when the guidelines matter. You should be encouraging your brightest people to go out and explore what it can do for them. And I don't think a lot of these are.
There's a few things that I'm picking up there around the expectation gap and embracing the friction, which is something that we're sort of as a society becoming pathologically afraid of. I think we just want no friction in our lives ever about anything. But if I think the gold lies beyond the friction, and allowing play and experimentation. And I think that then this idea of readiness maybe isn't even the question. It isn't even, it's the sort of, it's not an arrival at an endpoint, is it? It's like, let's see where it can take us. Then things start to open up and it gets really exciting. Luke, if I'm your client and you want to hold my hand and guide me towards the gold, where do we start?
So my number one thing that I start doing with new clients is all around AI fluency. That's my number one starting point, and it's exactly what we've all been saying on this podcast, right? Which is, if you really want to use AI and make the most out of it, you have to understand what makes it special and what makes it special, and not how it works. I don't want people to have to go out and become machine learning engineers, but what is kind of happening. What is going on when you write a prompt and you send it off? So I do a lot of work around AI fluency, which for me means, getting beyond the tool use, like hammering at something, and getting to treat it as a creative partner, treat it as something where you have an understanding with it, where you have the ability to collaborate in a genuine sense, and understanding the responsible AI principles, what hallucination is, what bias looks like, all that kind of stuff. And I think an organizational wide AI fluency plan, although it sounds relatively dull, is actually a really, really, really exciting place to start, because you'll start seeing all these bright, amazing people suddenly coming up with incredible ideas once they're shown the landscape. And that includes, very importantly, you're totally right, the most senior people in the business who have to go back to school.
Yeah. Well, sign me up. Because that understanding, when you understand what's going on in that interaction between you and the AI, then you can go really interesting places, rather than it becoming this sort of flatter interaction, which is less rewarding. Tom, share with us, what are you taking away from all of this?
Yeah, I guess one thing that's resonates well with me is this idea that organizations are sprinting to get ahead, and that's causing a lot of challenges as well. And I think in my mind, we didn't cover this too much, but the term agent washing and how, everyone's putting that stamp of AI and things, I think that's a risk in a lot of ways, especially from a business point of view. You don't want to be seen to be selling something that doesn't, work in the way you intend. And I think that comes down to a few different areas of problem, but the solution in my mind as well is to take an easy step first. Matured much quicker in some areas. Code generation, you have to look at the recent statistics from OpenAI and Anthropic to see it's being leveraged so much in those areas. And also a lot of the recent announcements are focused on integrations or ways in which we can enhance vibe coding and things like that. And I think those are the areas which it's probably easier to get some wins in, to do the experimentation, because the systems and the infrastructures are better. They're there for that stuff already. And I think my advice would be, sure, do the exciting experimentation, but also, set up the business to use the easy stuff, to use the good stuff that's well matured. And hopefully everything will spiral out from there. I think there's some value in, doing what works first.
And this is Talia.
I guess the thing that I'm coming back to time and time again is this enablement piece. For me, people and problems within organizations are so intertwined. And I think you need to understand, for me, I think you need to start there. You need to understand that, and you need to start there. Forget about the tech, because right now we've got loads and loads and loads of tech. But what you need to do first is really figure out what problems people have in the workplace. What problems are they trying to solve, both for themselves and their colleagues, but of course also for your customers, your clients, etc. So start there. Once you get that, I feel like a lot more doors are going to be able to unlock far easier than what they are at the moment. More talking to people, less talking to chatbots.
I have nothing further to add. Thanks very much.
Audio Jungle.